This is episode 2 on Cybernet resources, the PS5 project, game controller project, where we're going to be working through a variety of different episodes that our ultimate goal is to take a new PS5 PlayStation controller and convert it over using an Arduino to where it can control the Arduino connected to a robot. So today's activity in episode 2 is to use a USB host shield soldered together so that we can plug it into our Arduino Uno, and we'll be using the Arduino Uno for this project, and get it all assembled to where we can start connecting everything to the Arduino and start programming. So what we're going to be using here, the parts we're going to be using is, I've selected a Sparkfun USB host shield. Comes together individually separate from Sparkfun.com. And I chose this because I've had good luck with these in the past. There are a variety of different knockoffs, if you want to call them that, or a variety of different companies that make these USB host shields for Arduino. And I've seen quite a few of them, but the Sparkfun USB host shield seems to have the most consistent production construction to it. And plus, as you can see, there is a prototyping area that if you would need to add a different electronics to this based on the project you're using it for, there is space for that. Now, one of the disadvantages of this Sparkfun unit is that it doesn't come with the headers that you need to connect to the Arduino. So you will need to purchase 8-pin headers and 6-pin headers that will be soldered onto this Sparkfun unit. You're going to need some solder, and in this case we're using solder with no lead. If you're doing this in a school, most schools recommend that you use solder with no lead now. So I'm using that just to keep that, again, thinking safety conscious. And then some blue painter's tape. You could use duct tape, you could use scotch tape, whatever, to hold the pins in place while you're soldering. So with this, as you can see, you've got 2 sets of 8-pin headers and 2 sets of 6-pin headers. And what you're going to do is you're going to place your 8-pin headers in the holes marked RXTX all the way up through pin 7 on the board, and then we're going to solder each one of those pins at their location. Now you're going to need to do that for each one of these areas. And as you can see, your 8-pin headers go down that side of your board. Your 6-pin headers go down this side of your board. And then if you flip it over, you can see where you're going to have to solder each one of those individually. Now, that's the hard part, folks. If there is a hard part to it, you're going to need to obviously solder each pin to the pad, and you do not want to have any of the pads touching. If they touch, it's called a bridge, creates a dead short. So you're going to want to go through and solder those. Now, if you also notice that these header pins aren't connected, they don't stay on place there on the board. So what you need to do is hold them in place as you're soldering. And what I like to do with this shield and any other shield is take a small piece of blue painter's tape and use that to hold my header pin in place so when I flip it over I can solder it. So let me do that. Let me go back and put each one of these pins in. I'll take a piece of tape and solder those, or excuse me, tape those in place. 6-pin and a 6-pin. And let's see if we can't take a single piece of tape and solder that in, tape that in place. Doesn't have to be so tight that you're never going to get it off. You just want to have it to where that tape's going to hold it in place. And I'm going to need to do the same thing with the other side. These are my 8 pins. And then again, use my tape. See if I can hold that in place. Now, if you're working on this project and you've got another way to hold these pins in place that you use, that you think is better than using blue tape, duct tape, scotch tape, whatever, come back and in the comment section, let me know what that is. I'd be curious to hear what some of the other people are doing. Now, the blue tape does real well. I've used duct tape before. Scotch tape sometimes can be an issue because of the heat from soldering it. Sometimes the heat, if you get too much heat, will melt that scotch tape. But the blue tape and the duct tape seem to not have that problem. So now I'm going to flip that over, and as you can see, might be hard to see here, but I've got my pins now ready to go to solder. I plugged my soldering iron in and tinned the end of it, and I'm using my solder. And I want to dab a little bit of solder right on the end of that, just to make sure everything's good to go. And then I'm going to solder each one of these connections, making sure that I don't have any bridges. Doesn't take much, but you just got to practice a little bit to where you can get that on there with no problem. Now, once we get all these soldered, then I'll show you how to test these so that you know that each one is separate and individual and you don't have any bridges. The idea here when you solder them is to heat the pin, heat the solder pad. You don't really want to melt the solder to the iron. You let the heat from the iron transfer over to the pin and the pad, and let the solder flow onto the pin and the pad. If you don't get a good connection, then you're going to have problems when you go to actually use the USB shield on your Arduino. Right, that takes care of one side, and you can see I'm getting down to a short piece of solder, so I'm going to come back. I'm going to get a new piece of solder because you don't want to get your fingers too very close to the heat on the soldering iron. So let's come back, switch this around, and we need to go down the other side. A little bit of heat on the pin and the pad. Go to each one. And you want to take your time as you're doing this. Just, you get in a rhythm as you start to do these soldering joints. And just about the time that you think you're going right at a good speed, that's when you end up making a bridge. So you want to make sure you're paying attention and you're doing each one individually. On the board. And as you can see, I've got, again, a small piece. Put my soldering iron back in my rack. And if you look, you can see I've got a solder joint, individual solder joint on each one of those pins. Okay. Flip the board back over, and now I want to take off my tape. And you can see I've got my header pins, my female on this side, male on this side, and with my Arduino Uno, you can see that these pins are going to match up to my board. Okay? So that gets all of our pins soldered to our USB host shield. And again, I've used a Sparkfun board. I ordered the Sparkfun board, the headers, from Sparkfun.com. If you look in the comments, I will put a materials list for this specific board with the Sparkfun numbers in I'll post them online. So if you want to use this exact setup, you'll be able to order those. You can also find these on Amazon, Adafruit. There's a variety of different sources where you can get these in. I have no connections to any of them other than the fact that in these videos I'm going to explain to you what I'm using and where I purchased it, to show you where you can get them and the approximate price for it. So that's the soldering and the assembly of our USB shield for our Arduino Uno. In the next video we'll be excuse me, we'll be testing this unit to make sure that we've got everything set up, and then we'll be installing it on the board and begin our programming. Like always, if you enjoyed this video, please come back, watch the other ones, hit our subscribe button, and we will see you next time.